How to paint realistic eyes in watercolour. That's what this video is all about. So let's make a start and let's get them brushes wet. Now I know there's many ways of drawing out an image onto the watercolour paper. You can either use freehand, the grid system for example. You can also do this by putting graphite on the back of the printout, or in my case you can use graphite back to paper, which is what I prefer to use. I'm using a mechanical pencil today, and this is a 0.5 nib pencil. Now this is also a 2H lead, which means it's slightly harder than a normal standard pencil lead, which are normally HB, aren't they? And that just means it will give me a harder lead to kind of transfer that image through with. Once you got that on there, all I need to do then is take that away. Oh, by the way, I've made little reference marks around the edge there so I can reposition it if I need to at any given time. So just remove all of that, like so. And there's the outline drawing ready to go. Now once that image is transferred through to the watercolour paper, then what I'm going to do is lift off some of that residual graphite. Because what tends to happen, you get a little bit of an overspill from that graphite back paper. And I want to just be able to just about see where these outline drawings are. I don't want to have any really dark edges for these pencil marks. Now once I've got the pencil drawing on the paper, one thing I do very often do is go over the pencil marks with some paint. Now what that basically does, it helps to preserve the graphite on the paper. So when I decide to add the foundation washes on, the wet in wet washes, there's a good chance the pencil marks will stay put. Otherwise, very often what will happen is that when you get the washes onto the paper, the graphite will just wash away. It can do very often. Working my way around. Now this piece down here kind of hooks out just out a little bit just there. A bit more paint. And then down to about there. Now we have got an eyelid around this as well, so I want to pop that in. So the eyelid, the outside edge of the eye is probably about there. Kind of tapers away a little bit as it goes higher, but I'm going to put it in just for now so it can give us our kind of reference point on where things go. But also the other problem as well, unless you preserve those outlines on the paper, what can also happen is that then the washes will mix with the graphite and the graphite will tint that colour. So if you've got a really bright colour like a yellow or like a bright orange or something like that, the graphite will dullen that colour. Right, let's get a little bit of burnt umber. Right, so burnt umber. And you want this more to a watery consistency really, you don't want it too thick. That should be enough for now. And we're going to use that to go over all the pencil marks within the bird, but not the outside edges, so leave them be. So all the internal marks. And for that, I'm going to go back to my trusted size 00 brush, which is this one here, and that's a Winsor & Newton Cotman Series 111, size, as you can see, 00. Okay, burnt umber, here we go. Now let's talk about mixing those wash colours, or as I call them, the foundation washes. Now there's one thing I do all of the time for my paintings, and that's do lots and lots of testing with your watercolours first of all. And I do this by comparing the kind of colours which I'm mixing to that reference photograph. Be it on a tablet, an iPad, printed off from your printer, anything like that. Oh, just bear in mind as well, if you're comparing colours for testing by printing off from your printer first of all, you have to make sure that the colours within your printout looks about right to begin with. Otherwise, you'll obviously start mixing the wrong colours. I know, I've done it, I know what it's like. The Gambo hue is really bright. I know it looks darker in there, doesn't it, with my half pan, but it's a really bright mix. And a small amount of cadmium orange, not too much. Just a small amount. And if you're not sure if it's right, get some scrap watercolour paper like I've got here, look, and give it a test before you go onto that paper. Now I can spend a long time mixing these colours up, probably a good hour or two sometimes, just comparing colours, working out what I need for the painting first of all. Because mixing the right wash colours to begin with will give you some really good idea what you'll need for that main painting, and also help you to avoid some of those mistakes that you can make along the way. So remember, test, 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 test before you start on that painting, okay? It's so important. Right, so that's what you need to do. As for the eyes, we'll just sort of do a little bit of testing here, as you can see. So I'm going to go for a mixture of Gambo hue and cadmium orange. There's a hint of cadmium orange though, It's really strong, okay? So I'm going to use a little mixture there of Scarlet Lake, Cadmium Orange and Burnt Sienna. Okay, so let's get them mixed up now. We don't need too much of it, but just enough to do the job. Okay, let's start off with the lightest colour first of all. That's Gambo Hue. Gambo Hue. Now, so that's quite rich, so I think I still need a little bit more orange in there, so keep washing that brush out. Grab some more Cadmium Orange and then pop that in as well. And we'll try that. Now that's more like it. That's very similar to what we can see within that reference photograph. Now one technique I do use quite a lot is blending those watercolours on the paper itself, rather than mixing them all in the palette. First of all, I know I can do it that way around, but sometimes it's nice to kind of add the colour onto the paper on a wet surface, bear in mind. And just stick directly to the outside edge of this pupil. Now if your paper's too wet, you'll find that just blend everywhere, and we don't want that to happen, not at this stage. You want it to blend a little bit, but not absolutely everywhere. And once the first layer of colour is on, then I can start to think about introducing other colours into the mix. You can just about make out hints of that in places. I'm going to blend this out just a fraction because it's too dark, too strong. Just a little bit here and there. Damp clean brush, give it a tweak, just blend it and soften it and lighten it right to the edge. But you've also got to be quite selective where you place that colour. You've also got to think about how much paint you got on that brush when you're doing this wet in wet blending, because too much of one colour will overwrite the other colour onto it, completely wash that one out. Yes, it will mix with it, but some colours can be quite dominating, they really can. So you've got to be quite selective about the colours that you're going to blend wet in wet on that paper. Obviously, the wetter the paper, the less defined the blend will be. So if you allow the paper just to dry a little bit, so just slightly damp, then you find that you get more distinctive marks, but not too sharp, just slightly blurry around the edges. So back in with that Viridian Green and the Cerulean Blue. Just very lightly tap it. Notice I've just gone a little bit less on the bottom part towards the lower part of the pupil there. So working wet and wet on the paper is a really good technique to work with. It's a really good way of working with gentle blends, especially for something like a cat's eye. Now when you're working on those finer details within the eye, what you've got to think about is where things go. You've got to think about how to place all those little tiny marks within the eye. Look at, for example, where the main pupil comes down within the main iris. Look around that pupil and you can see there's a brown area there, like a deep brown. And you can pull out a few little lines here and there, so you can barely touch in the paper here. Just away from that pupil. Is it in the centre? Is it slightly higher? It's a little bit higher than the centre. Work that out first of all and try to ascertain where that goes. You don't always want that pupil in the dead centre of the eye. Not really. Depends on where it is on the photograph, obviously. In this case, it's just slightly above middle, only just. Marginally, I know. But then looking around the eye, thinking about where all those little marks go, and very tentatively putting those marks in to begin with. Not too deep, not too rich a colour at the moment. Look around where things are. Look at all the lighter colours you can see behind the scenes. Thinking about the main structure of the eye. Try to get those shapes spot on at this stage. It's very important. Because when we apply more layers over the top of these details, we know that these details are in the right place to begin with. Using the very tip of your brush. And the same applies to this area I just painted in. So a few slightly darker marks in there as well. And then, what I'm going to do is look towards the edge of this eye. Paint a line around. So work out where it goes. But you've got to really take your time with this. And remember to look at that reference photograph every few seconds. And have that photograph nearby. Try to have the same size as your painting. At least then you won't be attempting to paint far too many details that you're not actually able to see from the size that you're painting the eye. Now then, midtones. let me give you some ideas on what I do when I apply those midtones onto the paper. Now, working with midtones, all that basically means is putting another layer over the top. And what this will do will give you more of a depth to the painting. So you can see all the details behind the scenes, so you've got different layers one on top of the other. You see, that's the benefit with watercolour. With it being a transparent medium, you can allow the other colours to show through. It's the same colour, sometimes the pigment is a little bit thicker, so I will thicken it down to a fraction. But sometimes I even use the same consistency paint. So when you add another layer of the same paint over the top, it will get deeper in tone anyway. I'm adding these tiny little flicks just on the inside. I can see that these come down to about here roughly. Again, look carefully at the photograph. It's so important because you can see where these go. There are some duller sections in here as well actually, so we do need to dullien it in places. Just a few. But every layer you'll need fewer brush strokes because you do need to make sure that all the previous layers show through. At least by doing that, you're then ready to add those darkest, richest layers onto that paper. Look at where you can see these odd shapes within the eye. Look at the curves as well. Don't do the darkest ones yet. Okay, we'll get there, don't worry. We will. So tempting to go darker quicker. It really is, but just for being patient and taking your time with something like this, it does pay off. Now, even though I enjoy all aspects of the watercolour painting, all different stages, one stage I really do enjoy is adding the darkest tone on, because at least then it prevents the painting from looking far too flat. And to really bring that painting together. Now, the colour I use for the darkest layers will depend on the subject in question. For example, this cat's eye I'm painting here is, well, quite dark blue, isn't it? It's not really black. It's not like a jet black, a lamp black or an ivory black or anything like that. It's really black, and I'm using Payne's grey and indigo to create more of a kind of dark colour. But I don't just quickly pop a very dark colour in there in one go. Just make sure put it in the right place as well. It's all about plotting it out and mapping out the areas first of all, so you know exactly where you got to go. But most of that will be filled in. But you can just see just little areas where, to get some more paint pull, where I might as well fill this area in now. There's a little bit of light showing through in places. So if you do this in lines initially like this, with hardly any paint on that brush though, then you can gradually fill this area in just by using lines in this gentle curve. You have to be careful as well that when you're working with black, you don't completely deaden the painting. Now, as I did say earlier on, you need to think about adding less detail at this stage because you want everything else to show through underneath as well, don't you? So by looking very carefully, I mean very carefully, at that reference photograph, you can start to see where the darkest marks are. And once you've got those darkest marks in, then you can decide if you need to add a few more in. Step away, go make a cup of tea, come back again. And then decide if you want to add some more dark marks in. It's very easy to get carried away with the dark, it really is. And you don't want to completely kill all that lovely colour underneath, do you? So there's a paler area just on the other side of this eye here, or this line. It's a little bit thicker than that as well. So it's all about contrast now. I'm thinking about where it's darker and a little bit lighter. We've got these windows here, look, just very lightly. Let's add those little marks in there. And also just make a little mark as well where there's little lighter sections with the raw umber showing through underneath. So I'm just going to add a couple there, look. So really study that reference photograph. See where those darkest marks are going to go. Don't just block them in. So if you've got a very large area, don't just paint a whole block of black or something like that. Paint it on using directional marks. So look at the directions that the other marks underneath go. For example, in this eye, they're all aiming towards the centre, aren't they? So instead of just blocking a colour in, paint those lines in the right direction. And then that will be it for the darkest layers then. I'll tell you what, let's talk about the pupil next, shall we? So what I'll do, I'll pop a little link to the top right hand corner for you. I'll see you there.